Welcome back to World War II True Records. In this video, we are unearthing the chilling testimony of a survivor, told 50 years later to the one person he trusted with the truth, his grandson. But before we dive into this haunting account of the USS Arizona, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and leave a comment below. If you could sit down with any veteran of history, what is the one question you would ask? December 7th, 1941. 7:55 a.m. Battleship Row, Pearl Harbor. But before we dive into this haunting account of the USS Arizona, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and leave a comment below. If you could sit down with any veteran of history, what is the one question you would ask? The air in Oahu usually smells of salt spray and hibiscus, but this morning, on the deck of the USS Arizona, it smells like heavy oil and breakfast. You can almost feel the gentle rock of the massive ship, a 30,000-ton fortress of steel that everyone believed was unsinkable. Seaman Second Class James Miller, a name that represents so many who were there, is leaning against the railing, squinting into the morning sun. The water of the harbor is like glass. It's a lazy Sunday, the kind of morning where the biggest worry is whether the post-exchange will have enough stationery to write home to a girl in Ohio or a mother in Iowa. Then the hum begins. At first it's a low drone, like a swarm of bees in the distance. James doesn't look up immediately. Probably a flight of B-17s coming in from the mainland, he thinks. But the drone sharpens into a scream. Suddenly the sky isn't blue anymore. It's filled with dark shapes, diving like hawks. You see the red meatballs, the rising sun insignia, on the wings. The first explosions hit Ford Island, and the peace of the morning is shattered by the frantic, clanging rhythm of general quarters. "This is no drill," the speakers blare, the voice cracking with a terror that no one has ever heard before. James sprints. His boots hammer against the steel deck, a sound he will hear in his dreams for the next 5 decades. He heads for his battle station near the forward magazines. He passes friends, boys he'd played cards with just 8 hours ago, who are now fumbling with anti-aircraft guns, their faces masks of pure, concentrated shock. At 8:06 a.m., the world ends. A Japanese high-altitude bomber, a Kate, releases a 1,060-pound armor-piercing bomb. It isn't a direct hit on the deck that does the damage. It's where the bomb goes. It pierces the armored deck near Turret 2 and plunges deep into the heart of the ship, right into the forward powder magazine. In the stories told 50 years later, James describes it to his grandson not as a bang, but as a silent white flash. For a heartbeat, there is no sound. There is only a light so blinding, it feels like staring into the sun from an inch away. The explosion isn't outward. It's a massive vertical eruption of cordite and fire that lifts the 30,000-ton battleship out of the water like a toy. You can feel the heat now. It isn't just hot. It's a physical force that peels the paint off the bulkheads and the skin off anyone standing too close. Inside the ship, the air is replaced by fire. Over 100 men are incinerated in a literal blink of an eye. James is thrown through the air, the wind knocked out of him as he hits a bulkhead. When he opens his eyes, the lazy Sunday is gone. The sky is black with oil smoke. The deck is slanted at a terrifying angle, and the screams are something that don't belong in this world. He looks toward the front of the ship, but the front of the ship isn't there anymore. It's a jagged, flaming crater of twisted metal. He realizes he is standing in a furnace. His uniform is smoldering. He looks down at his hands, and the realization of what has happened begins to seep through the adrenaline. He isn't just fighting for his ship anymore. He is fighting to see December 8th, But as he struggles to his feet, he sees something through the smoke that stops his heart. A group of his shipmates are trapped behind a wall of fire, their eyes wide, looking at him through the heat haze. And between James and the only way off the ship is a sea of burning oil spreading across the water. The fire doesn't roar, it hisses. It's the sound of seawater meeting white-hot steel, a predatory noise that fills the space where the Arizona's superstructure used to be. James stands paralyzed for a heartbeat, his lungs screaming as the oxygen is sucked out of the air by the inferno. 50 years later, sitting in a quiet living room in the Midwest, he tells his grandson that the hardest part wasn't the pain, it was the clarity. He knew, with the cold precision of a mathematician, that he couldn't reach the men behind that wall of flame. "You have to understand," he whispers to the boy, his aged fingers tracing the scars on his forearms that look like melted wax. The ship wasn't a ship anymore. It was a chimney. Back on the deck, the choice is binary. Stay and be consumed by the silent white flash that is still expanding through the lower decks, or jump. But the water isn't a sanctuary. The Arizona had topped off her tanks with nearly 1.5 million gallons of bunker C fuel oil just days before. Now, that oil is hemorrhaging into the harbor, a thick, black carpet that has caught fire. You look down from the railing, and you don't see the Pacific. You see a lake of hell. James jumps. The impact with the water is like hitting a brick wall. The cold should be a relief, but the oil is everywhere. It's in his eyes, his nose, his mouth, a bitter, viscous taste of rot and industry. When he surfaces, he has to scream just to clear his airway. But as he opens his mouth, he realizes he is surrounded by a ring of fire. The oil on the surface is burning with a low blue-orange intensity. Every time he takes a stroke, he has to splash a hole in the fire just to keep his head from being scorched. It's a rhythmic, desperate dance. Push the fire away, take a breath of oily smoke, dive, and repeat. Around him, other shapes are moving in the water. Human torches, men who have lost the ability to scream, simply paddling with a primal instinct to move away from the sinking tomb behind them. "I didn't look back," James tells his grandson, his voice cracking. "If I looked back, I'd see the faces. And I knew if I saw the faces, I'd stop swimming." But the Arizona isn't done with him. As the ship settles into the silt of the harbor floor, a massive suction begins to pull at the survivors. The ship is drinking the harbor, pulling everything, debris, oil, and men, down into the blackened hull. James feels the tug at his boots. It's like a hand from the deep, a heavy metallic ghost demanding he return to his post. He kicks. He kicks until his muscles seize, until the salt and oil have blinded him. Finally, his hand strikes something hard. Not steel, but wood. A motor launch from the USS Tennessee has drifted into the chaos. Strong hands reach down, hands covered in the same black grime, and haul him over the gunwale. As he lies on the floor of the launch, gasping, he finally looks back. The Arizona is gone. Only the charred remains of the masts and the billowing, oily smoke mark the spot where 177 of his brothers are currently being entombed. But as the boat pulls away toward the safety of the shore, James hears something over the roar of the planes and the thud of the guns. It's a sound that will stay with him for 50 years, a sound he will eventually explain to his grandson as the debt. It wasn't the sound of the enemy. It was the sound of the men still alive inside the hull, banging on the bulkheads, signaling for a rescue that they all knew was never coming. The motor launch grinds against the concrete of the landing, but James doesn't move. He can't. The oil has cooled, hardening into a black sticky mask that glues his eyelashes shut and cakes his hair into a stiff macabre helmet. 50 years later, he tells his grandson that the most terrifying thing about that morning wasn't the fire. It was the anonymity. On that pier, there were no ranks. There were no officers or enlisted men. There were only shadows of men, dripping black ink onto the white sand of Hawaii. A nurse came up to me with a clipboard, James recounts, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. She looked me right in the eye, and she didn't see a person. She saw a black tag. That meant I was too far gone to save. She didn't know I was 19. She didn't know I had a mother waiting for a letter in Dayton. To her, I was just part of the Arizona's wreckage that happened to still be breathing. But James wasn't a black tag. He wipes the oil from his eyes with the back of a charred sleeve and refuses the stretcher. He looks back at the harbor. The USS Oklahoma has capsized, looking like the gray belly of a dead whale. The West Virginia is settling into the mud. The sky is no longer blue. It is a bruised, swirling purple of cordite and burning rubber. For the next 12 hours, the lazy Sunday boy disappears. James spends the day hauling ammunition, his hands blistering as he passes hot shells to gunners who are screaming at the empty air, waiting for a second wave that feels inevitable. He works until his fingernails bleed, driven by a frantic, jagged energy. He feels that if he stops moving, the weight of the 111 men he left behind will settle on his shoulders and crush him into the earth. Then comes the night of December 7th, the Great Silence. The harbor is eerily quiet, lit only by the flickering orange glow of the ships that refuse to stop burning. James sits on a crate, wrapped in a grease-stained blanket. He finally tastes the water, but it tastes like the Arizona. Everything, the air, the food, the water, is tainted by the ship. It is here, in the darkness of the first night of the war, that the silence begins. "I didn't speak about it for 50 years, James tells the boy in the living room. "Not to your grandmother. Not to your father. I locked it in a box because I felt that if I spoke their names, I was admitting they were truly gone. And as long as I stayed quiet, they were still just waiting for me to come back for them." The grandson looks at his grandfather's hands, the hands that survived the oil, the fire, and the silent white flash. He realizes that for half a century, his grandfather hasn't been living in the suburbs. He's been living in the hull of a sunken battleship, guarding a secret that he's finally ready to let go. But as James reaches into his pocket to pull out a small, weathered object he's kept since that day, his expression shifts from sorrow to a strange, haunting kind of duty. He looks at his grandson and says the words that bridge the gap between 1941 and today, a revelation that changes how the boy sees the memorial in Pearl Harbor forever. James's hand trembles slightly as he pulls his fist from his pocket. He opens it to reveal a small, blackened piece of brass, a locker key pitted by salt and fire, with the number 142 stamped into its face. It is the key to a locker that has sat at the bottom of the Pacific for 5 decades. It's the only part of the Arizona that came home with him. "You see that memorial they built over the hull?" James asks, looking not at his grandson, but through the walls of the room, back to the shimmering heat of Hawaii. People go there, and they see a beautiful white building. They see the names carved in marble. But when I look at it, I see the tears. He explains to the boy a phenomenon that every visitor to the USS Arizona Memorial knows, but few truly understand. To this day, the ship continues to bleed. Droplets of oil, the same Bunker C fuel that James fought through in 1941, still bubble up from the sunken tanks, rising to the surface like black pearls. They call them the tears of the Arizona. People think it's just an environmental leak, James says, his eyes glistening. But we survivors, we know better. That ship is still alive. And those men, they're still on watch. Every time a drop of that oil touches the surface, it's one of them reaching out to remind us that they haven't forgotten the promise we made to each other. The silent white flash didn't just end lives, it forged a tether. James tells his grandson about the divers who go down into the wreckage, not to salvage, but to perform a sacred duty. He reveals the secret that has finally brought him peace. When a survivor of the Arizona passes away, they have the right to have their ashes placed by Navy divers inside the barbette of Turret 4. "I'm going back, son," James says, a sudden firm strength returning to his voice. "I've spent 50 years feeling like a ghost, walking in a world that moved on without them. But when my time comes, I'm going back to the boys. I'm going to find my locker. I'm going to tell them that the world they died for is still turning." The grandson realizes then that his grandfather isn't afraid of death. For James, death isn't an end, it's a reunion. It's the final general quarters, where the crew is made whole again. As the sun sets outside the living room window, casting long orange shadows that look remarkably like the masts of a battleship, the silence between the two generations is finally a comfortable one. The story is no longer a burden, it is a bridge. James Miller, once a boy covered in black oil and black tagged for death, has finally finished his patrol. He leans back in his chair, the brass key glinting in the twilight. The debt is paid. The names on the marble wall are no longer just names. They are brothers, waiting in the quiet blue darkness of the harbor for one last sailor to come home.